This is the truth of what exists beyond Earth. There is an infinite amount of men, such as Adam, and it is possible that half of them have sinned. In the beginning, every man was given a rank, and the Most High God was given a whole amount of power, and the next High God was given half, and the third Most High was given a third, fourth was given a fourth of a whole, fifth was given a fifth of a whole, and then sixth was a sixth of a whole, and so on and so forth. You just keep adding, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they had that fraction of amount of a power of a whole. Well, it is only possible for half of the men to sin, because if all men sinned, then life wouldn't be sacred and it couldn't exist. So, in order for life to be sacred, only half of the men could sin, therefore, the rest of the half could take their power. Every time you sin, every time you curse, anytime you do a sexual profanity, anytime you know, hurt yourself or whatever, kill yourself, um, you lose power, and it starts. So we had starting at Adam. He was the first half of all men. So therefore, he was put on the spot to where if he sinned, everybody else below him would sin, and they would all start losing their power. So when Adam first sinned, he lost half his power, and then when he sinned again, he went down to a third of the power that he had, and so on and so forth. And then, so their power became God's power now, the higher gods. It started becoming their power. And every time he keeps sinning, he keeps losing power, and it keeps going to them. So in the beginning, he could have kept all his power, but now he has a small fraction of what he has. And in the beginning, you were supposed to have one son and one daughter and one wife. But when you sin, God cursed Adam and the ones who followed him to having more children. Therefore, he would have more power spread out, but less power per person. So in the beginning, his son had all the power that all of the men, all his children that are boys, had at once. And if he had any no children, he would have all the power that we have together, and we wouldn't exist. But since his father sinned, he now has half his power, and the other half has gone to his children, his sons, and same with his wife. His sister, he has she has if Adam never sinned, she would have whole amount of power as all the girls put together that she's had, but since they sinned, she only has half as well. Now you got to understand the ranking system. When I say a whole, it's technically one piece of power is equal to 1,000 pounds. So when you have 1,000 pounds and you multiply it by every number to exist, that's one piece times infinite. So that's an infinite amount of pieces. Now you multiply an infinite amount of pieces times infinite and infinite again, and now you have uh, basically like a graph. So you have one piece times infinite, and then infinite times that row. And now you have a set. Now you multiply that set by infinite, and now you have infinite sets. And that is the lowest amount of power that the last lowest God received. That was his amount of power. And then from multiply that infinite sets by infinite, and now you have a group or a whole amount of power, and that's how much the Most High God power has. So it goes whole and then half. So half has half as much as that. And if you're good at math and you understand that, that would make perfect sense. So that's how much power exists. And now creation works off the order of numbers. So every number has a title and it has an infinite amount of words. And each word has 10 things. it's divided into 10 categories. Like 14 is power, and one of the infinite out of infinite in power is strength. And you have types of strength such as accurate, precise, and focus. Those are types of strength. Now, when you take your power and the least amount of power that you can have is, or the least number that you can start is 10 ones. So 1,111,111,111. That's where your power can stop, and you can divide how much power you have into that number, and you'll have a fraction of 100, 10 1 in 10 ones per number. So that's how much power you'll have per number. But when you go on, if you just had strength, then that's how much you would have per one. But if you had strength and, let's say, truth, then you would have, because truth is another power, but the first row would be a whole, and strength would be on that, and then your next row would be a half of that, and then a third, and then a fourth, and so on. So let's say you stopped at 13, a 13th. So your first row would be a whole, and then your last row would be a 13th, but you would still have 1 and 10 ones on each row, but it'd be divided, and you would have more on your first row than your last row. They wouldn't be all equal. So that's how the power works. So every time we curse or sin, we lose power. So if you did the math right, then that means we didn't have two sets of infinites. We had one set, and then 90, and then two. So we would have two sets minus two of them, minus two infinite times a piece, and then all those pieces times infinite. So two of those would we take away, and that's how much we would have. But since we lost half at the first, we now have half of that, and then we lost. Then he sinned again, and now he went down to a third of that. So now let's say we're at like a decillionth. Everybody knows what decillion is. It's a really high number. If you know, that's a small amount of power compared to what God has. He has a whole, and we already had a little bit of power as it was. So now we're at less than 1% of what we actually had, and it's spread out to different. It's not given to one person now, it's given to many people as one. So we got to realize that as we sin, God is given the authority to strike us dead, because that's the sacred law, is to be a victor over sin. And when you're a victor, that gives you authority to murder. And we don't have the authority to murder because we don't have the power to. So anytime, technically, I'll explain in another video what happens, but we're not supposed to be killing one another. We're supposed to be living forever. And, that's the thing. When you sin, you die. When you don't sin, you live. That's the rule of life. And, Eve can never sin. There's her times an infinite amount of people, of women just like her, and they all have one daughter. And half of them still have one son and one daughter. And now the other half, it's up to one half of men can only sin. But the woman and the child from the first woman can't not sin, because they're sacred, and that's how they were created. But the man was given freedom to sin, because if he lost his power, he lost it for his whole family. So it's really up to him. So it's a just and holy law that he agreed to exist, and if he broke it, then he would lose power, and eventually God would catch up and possibly kill him. So if you have any questions about the math part, or any other questions, just send me a message. I'll post some videos if this gets some likes. Let's get this up there and get this out. Maybe people will understand it. People can talk about it or something. So thanks.